Hey guys, Catherine, back to talk a little bit about macOS versus iOS versus iPadOS for Apple mobile device management. So I did a video on this that just did a high level view, but when people first get started with Apple device management, they often assume that macOS, iOS, and iPadOS all behave the same under MDM. And while they're all built on the same framework, they do have different capabilities and limitations. So I'm going to take a couple minutes while I work on this and break them down at a high level. So one of the first things that we need to look at when we're looking at MDM is user autonomy versus device control. So iOS and iPadOS are both built with the idea of strong user privacy and a more controlled app and system environment. Almost everything is sandboxed. Apps can't access each other's data without explicit permission, and the operating system restricts a lot of those low-level system changes. macOS, on the other hand, is what you would call a desktop class operating system. So users have more freedom. Users may have full file system access. There's going to be multiple methods to install apps. And depending on the account permissions, users may be able to run scripts on the machine or have access to system processes and developer tools. So what that means is macOS mobile device management needs to support more complex workflows, but it also faces more OS level permission boundaries. So another thing to keep in mind is supervision and enrollment differences are another area where mobile device management differs by platform. So on iOS and iPadOS, supervision is what unlocks like the real management capabilities. And if you don't have supervision, you get a very limited set of controls. And if an iPhone or an iPad is enrolled using automated device enrollment, also known as ADE, it's automatically supervised. Now, supervision technically exists on macOS, but almost all management capabilities are available as long as that device is enrolled in MDM. The gap between supervised and unsupervised is much smaller on the Mac side. Now, the area where the platforms differ the most, in my opinion, is privacy and security permissions. So again, iOS and iPadOS use that strict sandboxing, so apps rarely need elevated system permissions. Most privacy preferences policy control, aka PPPC style prompts, don't even exist. On macOS, on the other hand, apps can request screen recording, input monitoring, file system access, accessibility permissions, automation of other apps, and things like that. Now, these will require explicit approval either through a PPPC profile or user's consent. That's another big part of why macOS management often feels more complex, is because the operating system exposes more capability and options. Another key difference is how app deployments are handled. iOS and iPadOS apps almost always come through the App Store or Apps and Books. Sometimes people will refer to this as VPP, Volume Purchasing Program. They're standardized apps, signed, sandboxed, and they all follow the same deployment logic. Now, macOS, on the other hand, supports App Store apps, Apps and Books, or again, VPP managed apps, PKG installers, .app bundles, as well as signed and unsigned software, and then applications with helper tools or daemons that may run locally on the device. So that makes macOS app deployment more flexible, but also more nuanced and more complicated. So again, you're probably noticing a pattern. macOS has more functionality, but can also be more complicated. Now, another area that differs is updates. iOS and iPadOS updates are tightly controlled. Apple enforces a predictable update cadence, deferrals, and behavior across all mobile devices. macOS updates are more complex though, enough so that we'll actually have multiple videos explaining some of the different options that are available for macOS updates and their associated admin and end user experiences, since it can sometimes get confusing on what to do and when. Now, Apple MDM generally has good update controls across all platforms, but iOS and iPadOS tend to be more consistent in terms of end user behavior and experience. Now, the final difference that I'll talk about is remote support capabilities. iOS and iPadOS allow for loss mode, remote lock, and location tracking, which are core mobile workflows. macOS allows for much deeper remote support options. These include remote terminal, remote desktop, file system access, remediation scripts, and other things like that just allow you a little bit more control as the admin. The additional capabilities for macOS enable us personally at Adigy to give those helpful real-time insights and more immediate control to the administrator when they need it, rather than just at a device's normal check-in time. Basically, though, the short version is this. iOS and iPadOS are highly controlled, highly predictable sandbox platforms, great for consistent app deployment and strong restrictions. macOS is a powerful, flexible, desktop-grade operating system that gives users more freedom, but requires more nuanced management around permissions, updates, apps, and automation. So lots of things to consider, even though they share the same underlying MDM framework. They have completely different management realities for platform-specific items. And understanding these differences is the key to building policies that work for both you and your end users across your Apple fleet. Hopefully you learned a few things about the differences between the different platforms and what to expect as you're rolling out Apple mobile device management and giving potentially end users multiple devices on different platforms and trying to ensure a consistent user experience. We'll be releasing more videos with best practices, tips, and some more complex processes and workflows. So please subscribe and tune in. Hopefully you found this helpful. Thanks, guys.